Sometimes saving a stranger is the moment your life stops being yours. The rain came down hard enough to blur the streetlights into streaks of gold, and Emily Carter pulled her thin jacket tighter as she hurried down the narrow alley, counting the last $28 in her pocket and wondering how many more nights she could outrun rent, exhaustion, and the quiet fear that she was falling behind in a city that never waited for anyone. Then she heard it, a sound too soft to belong in the storm, a broken breath, or maybe the absence of one, and her steps slowed despite herself, instinct telling her to keep moving while something deeper pulled her closer. And that's when she saw him, a man sprawled against the cold brick wall, soaked through, unnaturally still, like he didn't belong to the world around him. "Hey," she called, her voice swallowed by the rain as she dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Nothing, no pulse, no movement, just skin colder than it should be, colder than the night. "No, no, no," she whispered, glancing toward the street. No cars, no footsteps, no help coming. And for a second she hesitated, the kind of hesitation that divides people into those who walk away and those who don't. Then she made the choice, tilting his head back the way she'd seen in a first aid video months ago, her breath hitching as she leaned down, "Please don't die," and pressed her lips to his, forcing air into him once, twice, the world shrinking to the space between them, to the impossible stillness of his body. Until suddenly everything changed. His eyes snapped open, not fully, just a flicker, but enough for her to see it, a flash of deep crimson glowing beneath the rain, like embers hidden under ash, and Emily froze, her breath caught halfway as his gaze locked onto hers for the briefest second before his body went still again, heavier somehow, like whatever had awakened in him had retreated just as quickly. "What?" she whispered, pulling back, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the storm, but the air had shifted, colder, sharper, charged with something she couldn't name. And then came the sound. Engines. Low and smooth, too controlled for panic, too precise for coincidence. Headlights cutting through the alley as 2 black SUVs glided in without a single screech, stopping just feet away, doors opening in perfect unison. Figures stepping out dressed in dark coats that seemed untouched by the rain, moving with a quiet precision that made Emily's chest tighten. One of them looked at the man beside her and went still, then dropped to one knee without hesitation, his voice low but unmistakable. "We found him, the king." And Emily's breath left her in a silent gasp because the stranger she had just tried to save, the man whose lips were still warm against hers, wasn't just anyone. And as all eyes turned toward her, something told her with absolute certainty that nothing in her life would ever be simple again. Emily did not move. Not when the man knelt. Not when the others followed, forming a silent circle around the stranger at her feet. And for a moment, the only sound was the rain tapping against concrete, steady, indifferent, like the world had decided this moment did not matter, even though everything inside her screamed that it did. "Step back," one of them said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made her chest tighten, and she shook her head without realizing it, her fingers still hovering near the man's shoulder as if letting go completely would make whatever just happened real. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked, her voice barely steady, and no one answered her directly. Instead, the same man who had knelt leaned closer to the stranger, his movements precise, careful, like he was handling something far more fragile than human. "He is still responding," another voice murmured, and Emily caught the word responding and felt a chill crawl up her spine because people did not respond like that. Not after having no pulse, not after lying in the rain like they were already gone. And then the stranger's hand moved, just slightly, but enough for her to see it. Enough to make her breath catch, his fingers curling as if reaching for something unseen, and every single person around her went completely still. "My king," the kneeling man said again, softer this time, almost like a vow. And before Emily could process it, those eyes opened once more, not a flicker this time, but fully, revealing a deep, unnatural red that seemed to glow from within, locking onto her with an intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. And in that second, she understood something without knowing how. He remembered, not just the moment, the contact, the breath she had given him. You. His voice was low, controlled, but there was something beneath it, something ancient and sharp that made her instinctively lean back, her heart racing. You should not be here, he continued, and Emily almost laughed at the absurdity of it because she was the one who found him, the one who stayed, the one who chose not to walk away. I try to help, she said, her words rushing out before she could stop them. And something shifted in his expression, not softness, not exactly, but recognition, like a memory he did not expect to have. And then everything changed again. The men around them straightened, tension rippling through them as one stepped closer. We must leave immediately, he said, urgency breaking through the calm for the first time. They will be tracking the disturbance. And Emily did not understand what that meant, but she felt it, the sense that whatever had just happened was not supposed to happen, that she had crossed into something hidden, something dangerous without realizing it. And suddenly the alley felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Take him, another ordered, and two of them moved forward with something that looked like a sleek medical stretcher, but before they could touch him, his gaze snapped back to Emily, holding her in place like gravity had shifted. No, he said, and the words stopped everyone instantly. Even the rain seemed quieter for a heartbeat. She comes with us, he added, and Emily's stomach dropped. Wait, what? No, I have to go home, she said quickly, shaking her head, stepping back, but the look in his eyes did not change. It only deepened, like he was seeing something she could not. You already crossed the line, he said quietly, and there was no threat in his voice, only certainty. You gave me your breath. His gaze flickered briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. That is not something this world forgets. And Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the realization that whatever choice she made in that alley, it was no longer hers to undo. Emily shook her head again, slower this time, as if the motion itself could push reality back into something normal, something safe. I did not agree to anything, she said, her voice tightening. But even as the words left her lips, she knew they sounded weak against the quiet authority surrounding her. The men did not argue, did not threaten. They simply waited, watching her the way people watch a door they already have the key to, and that unsettled her more than anything else. You do not understand, the man beside her said carefully, not unkind, but distant. What happened here is not ordinary. And Emily let out a short breath, almost a laugh. Yeah, I figured that part out, she muttered, glancing at the stranger, at the man they kept calling King, who was now sitting up with unnatural steadiness, like gravity had less claim on him than it should, his gaze never leaving her. And that was the worst part, not the cars, not the men, not even the impossible way he had come back to life. It was the way he looked at her like she had changed something fundamental, something neither of them could see yet. I have a job, she continued, words tumbling out faster now. I have rent due in 3 days. I cannot just disappear into whatever this is. And for a brief second, something flickered across his expression. Not confusion, not exactly, but something quieter, like the concept of ordinary life was distant to him, almost forgotten. 3 days, he repeated softly, as if testing the meaning of it. Then his attention shifted slightly, focusing inward, listening to something no one else could hear, and the atmosphere tightened instantly. The men around him straightened there, calm precision sharpening into alertness. They are closer than expected, one of them said under his breath, and Emily felt the words more than understood them, felt the way the air seemed to press in, heavy with anticipation. We need to move now, another insisted, and this time there was no hesitation in their voices, no space left for discussion, and before Emily could step back again, one of them reached for her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop her retreat. Wait, she said quickly, panic rising sharp and sudden. You cannot just take me. But the stranger, the king, stood then, fully, effortlessly, like the weakness she had seen minutes ago had never existed. And when he moved closer, the space between them seemed to shrink on its own. You think this is about choice, he said quietly, his voice no louder than before, but somehow impossible to ignore. It is not, and Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing, searching for something anything that would make sense of this, but all she found was the memory of that moment, his eyes opening, that impossible red, the connection that had flashed between them. "Then what is it about?" she asked, her voice softer now, not from calm but from the weight of something she could not name. And for the first time his gaze softened, just slightly, enough to make her question if she imagined it. "It is about consequence," he answered, and the words settled heavily between them. "You gave life where there was none," he continued, his eyes steady on hers. "And in my world, that kind of act does not fade." The engines of the vehicles hummed softly behind them, doors already open, waiting, and the rain continued to fall, relentless, as if trying to wash the moment away. But Emily knew it would not. She felt it deep in her chest, that quiet, irreversible shift, the point where her life had split into before and after. And as the man in front of her extended his hand, not forcing, not demanding, but certain she would take it, she realized with a cold clarity that walking away was no longer as simple as turning around. Emily stared at his hand, rain sliding down her face, mixing with the heat of her breath as her mind raced through every possible outcome, every instinct screaming at her to run, to turn and disappear into the city like she always did when things got too complicated, too heavy, but her feet did not move, and she hated that. Hated the way her body seemed to hesitate, not because she was forced, but because something inside her recognized the truth in his words. Consequence. The word echoed in her mind, low and steady, like a clock she could not stop. "If I go with you," she said slowly, forcing the words out, "I am coming back, right?" And the question felt fragile the moment it left her, like she already knew the answer would not be simple. And for a second he did not respond, his gaze holding hers, measuring. Not her strength, not her fear, but something deeper, something she did not understand. "That depends," he said at last, his voice calm, almost gentle. And that made it worse somehow. "On what?" she asked, her throat tightening, and he stepped closer, just enough for her to feel the shift in the air between them, colder, sharper, but not threatening, just different, like standing too close to a storm that had not decided whether it would break. "On what you have become to me," he answered. And the words did not make sense, not yet, but they settled in her chest like they would, like they were waiting for something to unlock. And behind him the men exchanged brief glances, silent communication passing between them, urgency building in the way they stood, the way their attention flicked toward the mouth of the alley, as if expecting something to appear at any moment. "Sir," one of them said quietly, "we do not have much time." And that was when Emily realized this was not just about her anymore. Whatever they were afraid of, whatever they were trying to avoid, it was close, and somehow she was now part of it. "I did not ask for this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. And for the first time his expression shifted in a way she could understand. Not power, not control, but something almost human. "Neither did I," he replied, and the honesty in it caught her off guard. Just enough to break the last piece of resistance holding her in place. Her hand lifted slowly, almost on its own, hovering for a brief second before settling into his. And the moment their skin touched again, something pulsed between them. Not visible, not loud, but undeniable, like a quiet current, running beneath the surface. And Emily's breath hitched as a strange warmth spread through her fingers, up her arm, stopping just short of her chest, and she pulled in a sharp breath, eyes widening. "What was that?" she asked, her voice barely steady, but he did not answer, not directly, his gaze shifting briefly to their joined hands before returning to her face. "Proof," he said simply, and before she could ask anything else the world moved around them, the men guiding them toward the waiting vehicles with practiced efficiency, doors opening, space made without a single wasted motion, and Emily hesitated only once more, glancing back toward the alley, toward the life she had known just minutes ago, small, difficult, but hers. And as she stepped into the car, the door closing softly behind her, she realized with a quiet, sinking certainty that whatever waited ahead was not something she could leave as easily as she had entered. And across from her, in the dim light of the vehicle, his eyes still held hers, steady, unrelenting, as if this moment had been inevitable long before either of them understood why the car moved without a sound, gliding through the rain-slick streets as if the city itself was making way for it, and Emily sat rigid in the leather seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, trying to steady her breathing as the reality of what she had just done began to settle in. The door was locked, not visibly, but she could feel it, the quiet certainty that stepping out was no longer an option. And across from her he sat in complete stillness, his presence filling the space without effort, his eyes no longer glowing but no less intense, watching her as though every small movement mattered. "Where are you taking me?" she asked finally, her voice low but steady, refusing to let fear take over completely. And for a moment he did not answer, his gaze shifting briefly to the window where the blurred lights of the city streaked past like distant stars. "Somewhere safe," he said at last. And the word safe felt strange coming from him, not because it sounded false, but because it sounded absolute, like his definition of safety did not match anything she understood. "Safe from what?" she pressed. And this time it was one of the men seated near the front who responded, his tone careful, measured. "From those who will not see your actions as kindness." And Emily frowned slightly, her mind trying to catch up. "I helped someone who needed it," she said, and the man glanced at her through the reflection in the glass, his expression unreadable. "You interfered with something far more significant than you realize," he corrected quietly, and before she could respond, the man across from her shifted slightly, his attention returning fully to her. "Enough," he said, not harsh, but final, and the conversation ended as quickly as it began, leaving only the steady hum of the car and the sound of rain against the windows, and Emily exhaled slowly, leaning back just a fraction, trying to process everything. Her life only an hour ago had been simple, difficult, but predictable, and now she was sitting in a silent car with strangers who spoke in controlled tones about things that did not belong in her world. And at the center of it all was him, the man she had pulled from the edge of something she still did not understand. "Why me?" she asked quietly after a long moment, the question slipping out before she could stop it. And this time he answered without hesitation. "Because you did not walk away," he said, his voice softer now. And something about that answer made her chest tighten, not from fear, but from the weight of it. Like her, choice mattered more than she had ever considered. And she looked down at her hands, at the faint warmth still lingering in her skin from where he had touched her. And for a second, she wondered if she would have done it differently if she had known, if she would have kept walking, ignored the sound, chosen herself over a stranger. And the answer came quicker than she expected. No, she would have stopped anyway. And that realization scared her more than anything else, because it meant this was not an accident, not really. It was a consequence of who she was. And as the car slowed, turning smoothly into a private drive lined with tall iron gates that opened without hesitation, revealing a structure beyond that looked less like a home and more like something out of another world, sleek and silent and far removed from anything she had ever known. Emily felt her breath catch again, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming sense that she had just crossed into a place where the rules she lived by no longer applied. And as the car came to a stop and the door opened beside her, the man across from her stepped out first before turning back, his hand extending toward her once more, not forcing, not commanding, but certain. And this time she did not hesitate as long before taking it, because somewhere deep down she understood that whatever came next had already begun the moment. She chose not to walk away. The ground beneath Emily's shoes felt too smooth, too clean, like even the earth here had been shaped by control rather than time. And as she stepped out of the car, the air changed instantly, no longer heavy with rain and city noise, but still quiet, almost unnaturally so. The towering structure before her stretching upward in dark glass and steel, reflecting nothing back, as if it chose what to reveal and what to hide. And for a moment she just stood there, her hand still lightly held in his, her breath catching as the reality of where she was settled in deeper. "This is not a house," she whispered without thinking, and he glanced at the building, then back at her. "No," he said calmly, "it is not." And something about the way he said it made her realize he did not see it the way she did, not as impressive or intimidating, but simply as expected, like this level of power was normal to him. "Come," he added, releasing her hand only to gesture forward, and the large doors opened before they even reached them, silent, precise, as if the building itself was aware of his presence. And Emily hesitated for just a second before stepping inside, her eyes widening slightly as the interior revealed itself, vast and dimly lit, with soft gold lights lining the walls, and a ceiling so high it disappeared in a shadow. Everything immaculate, untouched, like no one here ever rushed, ever made mistakes. And that thought alone made her feel even more out of place, her shoes sounding too loud against the polished floor, her movements too uncertain compared to the quiet confidence of the people around her. "You will be safe here," one of the men said as they walked, his tone respectful, directed not at her but at him, and Emily noticed the way they all kept a careful distance, not out of fear exactly, but something close to it, something like reverence, and she glanced at him again, trying to reconcile the man who had been lying in the alley, still and silent, with the one walking beside her now, composed, controlled, undeniably powerful. "What exactly are you?" she asked quietly, unable to hold the question back any longer, and for a moment the only response was the echo of their footsteps. Then he slowed slightly, just enough for her to match his pace without feeling like she was being pulled along. "I am what your world prefers not to believe in," he said, his voice even, without arrogance, without apology, just fact, and Emily let out a slow breath, her mind racing to place his words into something she could understand, something logical. But logic had stopped applying the moment his eyes had opened in that alley. "And now I am here because of that," she said, more to herself than to him. And he looked at her then, not with intensity this time, but something quieter, more focused. "You are here because you chose to act when others would not," he corrected, and she frowned slightly. "That still does not explain why I cannot leave," she said, stopping as they reached a wide staircase that curved upward into darkness. And for the first time since they arrived, he turned fully toward her, his expression unreadable, but his attention absolute. "Because what you did created a connection," he said, and the word landed heavier than the others. Connection. It sounded simple, harmless even, but the way he said it made it feel like something far more binding, far more permanent. "What kind of connection?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost cautious, and he studied her for a moment before answering, as if deciding how much to reveal. "One that should not exist," he said finally, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any explanation. And as Emily stood there, in a place that did not belong to her, beside a man she did not understand, she felt that same faint warmth stir again beneath her skin, subtle but undeniable, like something had been set in motion that could not be undone. And for the first time since leaving the alley, she realized that the real danger might not be the world she had stepped into, but the part of it that had already begun to change her. Emily stood frozen for a moment after his words. Settled. The idea of a connection that should not exist repeating in her mind like something unfinished, something waiting to reveal its true meaning. And she became suddenly aware of the silence around them. Not empty, but controlled, like every sound in this place had permission to exist. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. And he did not answer right away, his gaze shifting past her toward the upper levels of the structure, as if measuring something unseen, something distant, then returning to her with that same quiet certainty. "Now we find out what you are," he said, and the words made her chest tighten, not because of what he said, but how easily he said it, like her identity was no longer fixed, no longer hers alone. "I already told you I am nobody," she replied, a hint of frustration breaking through as she crossed her arms, grounding herself in something familiar, something human. And for the first time, there was the faintest trace of something almost like amusement in his expression, not mocking, but knowing. "Nobody does not alter fate," he said simply, and before she could respond, a new presence entered the space, soft footsteps descending the curved staircase, measured and deliberate, and Emily turned instinctively, her breath catching slightly as a woman appeared from the shadows above. her movements smooth, her posture straight, dressed in deep tones that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, her eyes settling immediately on Emily with sharp focus. "So this is the human," the woman said, her voice calm but layered with something Emily could not quite place, curiosity, perhaps, or something more guarded. And the room shifted subtly again, the air tightening as the other stepped back just slightly, creating space, not for Emily, but for the woman. "She is the one," he replied, his tone unchanged, but the weight behind it unmistakable, and the woman's gaze flickered briefly to him before returning to Emily, studying her more closely now, as if searching for something beneath the surface. "Interesting," she murmured, stepping closer, and Emily resisted the instinct to step back, holding her ground. Even as her pulse quickened, "What is interesting?" Emily asked, refusing to let herself be treated like something to be examined without question, and the woman's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "You are still standing," she said, and that answer only deepened the confusion twisting in Emily's chest. "Was I not supposed to be?" she replied, and for a brief moment, silence settled again, heavier this time, before the man beside her spoke once more. "Most do not," he said, and Emily turned to him sharply. "Most what?" she asked, and he held her gaze steady, unflinching. "Most who form a bond with my kind do not remain unchanged," he answered, and the words sent a quiet ripple through her. Not fear exactly, but something close, something that made her aware of her own heartbeat. Faster now, stronger than before, and that warmth she had felt earlier stirred again, more noticeable this time, like something beneath her skin responding to his presence. "I feel fine," she said, quickly, though even as she said it she was not entirely sure it was true, and the woman stepped closer again, stopping just a few feet away, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if sensing the same thing. "That is what makes this unusual," she said softly, and for the first time, Emily realized that whatever this connection was, whatever had been set in motion in that alley, it was not just affecting her, it was affecting them too, and that realization shifted something inside her, just slightly, enough to make her lift her chin, to meet their gaze with a little more steadiness than before, because if she was no longer just a bystander in this world, then maybe she was not as powerless as she felt, even if she did not yet understand how or why Emily held the woman's gaze, refusing to look away even as the silence stretched. And for a moment it felt like the entire room was waiting, not for an answer, but for a reaction, something that would confirm whatever they believed about her. And she could feel it again, that quiet warmth beneath her skin, stronger now, not painful, not overwhelming, just present, like a second heartbeat trying to find its rhythm. "You keep looking at me like I am supposed to be something else," Emily said finally, her voice steady but edged with tension. "But I'm still the same person who walked into that alley." And the woman tilted her head slightly, considering her words. "That is precisely what makes this situation complicated," she replied, her tone measured, and before Emily could respond, the man beside her stepped forward just slightly, enough to shift the focus back to him. "She remains human," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. And the woman's eyes flickered with something sharper, something closer to concern now. "For now," she corrected quietly, and the two words landed heavier than anything else that had been said, and Emily felt her chest tighten. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice dropping, more cautious now. And the woman exhaled slowly, as if weighing how much to reveal. "It means that whatever connection was formed between you and him is not behaving as it should," she said, her gaze steady on Emily. "And when things do not behave as they should in our world, they rarely remain harmless." And the calm way she said it made the warning even more unsettling, and Emily shook her head slightly, trying to push back against the rising unease. "I do not feel dangerous," she said, almost defensively. But even as she spoke, that warmth pulsed again, just beneath the surface, stronger this time, like something responding to the tension in the room. And the man beside her noticed it instantly, his gaze dropping briefly to her hand before returning to her face, sharper now, more focused. "You feel it," he said quietly, And it was not a question, and Emily hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering. "I do not know what I feel," she admitted, and that was the truth, the most unsettling part of all. And the woman stepped closer again, slower this time, more deliberate, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if sensing something shifting in real time. "It is reacting," she murmured, more to him than to Emily, and the room seemed to tighten again, the others watching carefully now, not with curiosity, but with caution. And Emily's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the growing awareness that she was no longer just being observed. She was being evaluated. "Stop talking about me like I am not here," she said suddenly, the words sharper than she intended, but she did not take them back. And for a brief second, something changed. The tension broke just enough for both of them to look at her differently, not as an unknown variable, but as someone who was pushing back, who was refusing to simply accept what was being decided for her. And the man's expression shifted again, something quieter returning to his gaze, something almost approving. "You are right," he said, and the simplicity of it caught her off guard. "Then start explaining." She replied immediately, her voice steadier now, grounded by the fact that she was still herself, still capable of speaking, of choosing. And he studied her for a moment before answering. "When you gave me your breath, you did more than restore life," he said slowly, choosing each word with care. "You altered the balance between our worlds," and Emily felt the weight of that settle in her chest, heavier than before, not because she understood it, but because she knew it mattered. "And now," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "that balance is beginning to respond," and the faint warmth beneath her skin pulsed again, stronger than ever. And this time she could not ignore it, could not pretend it was nothing. And as she stood there, surrounded by a world she did not belong to, feeling something inside her that should not exist, Emily realized that whatever had begun in that alley was not just a moment. It was the start of something that neither of them fully controlled anymore. Emily did not realize she had taken a step back, until her shoulders brushed against the cold surface behind her, the faint warmth beneath her skin now pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm that no longer felt subtle, no longer easy to ignore. And for the first time since all of this began, a quiet, unsettling thought surfaced. Not fear of them, not fear of this place, but fear of what was happening inside her. "Make it stop," she said softly, her voice not breaking, but carrying something raw beneath it. And the man in front of her moved instantly, not with urgency, but with precision, closing the distance between them in a way that felt controlled, deliberate, like every movement had purpose. "It is not something that can be stopped," he said, his tone calm, but there was something else there now. Something sharper, more focused, as if the situation had shifted into something even he had not fully anticipated. And Emily shook her head, her breathing uneven now. "Then explain it to me in a way that makes sense," she said, her voice rising. Just slightly, not in panic, but in frustration, in the need to understand before she lost control of the narrative entirely. And for a moment, silence settled again, heavy and watchful, until the woman finally spoke, her voice quieter this time, less distant. "The bond between human and our kind is not meant to form through simple contact," she said, her gaze steady on Emily. "It requires ritual, intention, balance." And she paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What happened between you two?" "Ignored all of that." And the implications settled slowly, heavily, and Emily looked at him, really looked this time, at the calm exterior, at the way he held himself like someone who had never questioned his place in the world. "So what does that make me?" she asked, the question softer now, not defensive, but searching, and he did not look away, did not hesitate. "It makes you necessary," he said, and the word hit differently than she expected. Not comforting, not reassuring, but binding, like a role she had not chosen but could not refuse. And before she could respond, the warmth surged again, stronger than before, enough to make her inhale sharply as her fingers tightened slightly at her sides, and this time it did not fade immediately. It lingered, steady, present, and the room reacted to it, the subtle shift in posture, the heightened attention, the awareness that something was actively changing. "It is accelerating," the woman said quietly, her voice carrying a note of urgency now. And he stepped closer again, not touching her this time, but close enough that the air between them felt charged, responsive. Emily, he said, her name deliberate, grounding, and the sound of it pulled her focus back to him, anchoring her just enough to steady her breathing. Look at me, he added, and she did, holding his gaze as the world around them seemed to blur at the edges. You are not losing yourself, he continued, his voice lower now, more controlled. You are becoming something your world does not have a name for. And that should have terrified her, should have pushed her further back. But instead it did something unexpected. It steadied her just slightly, enough to let her breathe again, to let her think. And as the warmth slowly settled into something quieter, something less overwhelming, Emily realized that whatever this connection was, whatever it was turning into, it was not one-sided. It was not just happening to her. It was happening between them. And that meant something she did not fully understand yet, but could feel in the way he watched her, in the way the room responded, in the way everything seemed to shift around that single moment in the alley. And as she stood there, no longer trying to step away, no longer trying to undo what had already begun, Emily made a quiet decision. Not spoken, not announced, but solid. If this was something she could not escape, then she would not face it blindly. And as her gaze held his, steady now, unflinching despite everything, the faintest hint of a different kind of tension settled between them. Not fear, not control, but something deeper, something that neither of them could fully define. Yet, and somewhere beyond the walls of that silent place, the storm continued to move, unaware that inside, something far more powerful had already begun to change the course of both their worlds.